There's actually many reasons why allergens can affect some people and not other people, or different allergens can affect some people and not other people. And we don't know all of the reasons yet, but we know some of them. And one of them is the genetics of the person, so the genes that they inherited from their families and how that influences their immune system. And then the other is environment. And most people think that the responsiveness or not of an individual to a particular allergen is the combination of both their genes and their environment. So somebody who has a gene that's expressed, let's say, at a much higher level, that is a gene that regulates how quickly your cells will respond, your immune cells will respond to an antigen or an allergen, can change whether or not they respond to something or they ignore it. So we have genes that sort of suppress immunity and keep it dampened, and we have genes that activate it. And you can imagine that if you had changes in those genes that changed the speed or the frequency in which your immune response goes, you could change your ability to respond or not to an allergen. The other thing that is important is the environment and what allergens you're exposed to and when you're exposed to them during your life. So again, coming sort of back to the hygiene hypothesis, the immune system is a lot like the brain, and it needs to learn. So once you're born, you come out into an environment that the baby has never seen before, and the immune system has to learn everything that's there. And one of the things that it does when it learns is it gets taught by what's around it. So if there is nothing around, there is no bacteria, there are no viruses, because your baby is in a very sterile environment, you can imagine that your immune system doesn't have anything to learn from. And if it doesn't have anything to learn from, what we've found is that the immune system goes out and looks for stuff to respond to. And so one of the things that often happens, or that we think happens, is that it gets inappropriately trained by things that it should ignore because it doesn't have the other things there to teach it. And so one of the things that's pretty well known in the allergy field or the asthma field is the kinds of allergens or antigens that you're exposed to early in life change the training of your immune system and can change whether your immune system is more likely to respond by making what Bayer called the Th1 response, which is good against viruses and bacteria, or a Th2 response, which, while it will protect you from an intestinal worm, also causes allergies. And so it really is that sort of combination of both the environment and the kind of immune system that you have.
It's good to expose maybe your kid to the dust, to the environmental bacteria, to that kind of dirty environment. I think it's good to do it. So, contrary to what you may think, right? That it's better to clean your house, maybe it's not that bad. So, in fact, there are studies that say that the houses that you have kids with, in houses that they have also pets, they are getting better and they don't develop that allergic response that frequently.
I think that the data is becoming more clear that early exposure is probably not a bad thing. And they're actually doing studies in the clinical studies now to ask, again, they're looking at, for example, families where there is a history of peanut allergies and you have a new sibling. Do you want to not expose that child ever, or do you want to expose them early? And there are huge clinical trials that are going on in Europe to ask that very question. So I think someday we might have the answer to whether or not that early exposure is actually beneficial or harmful. At this point, I would say the jury is still out. But I think our idea that the cleaner we make everything, the better it is, I think is wrong. And the immune system evolved to fight pathogens. And if you take away all pathogens, and I'm not saying that you should go out and expose your kids to, horrible bacteria or something like that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that they should live, if they ate a little dirt, it's probably not going to hurt them, right? And trying to prevent that at all costs is probably not the best choice. I think that you can go too far the other way in terms of cleanliness. I'm not saying that you should be dirty, but I don't think that, again, that having a sterile environment is good for babies. One of the things that I think we can say that genes do play a role, but you can imagine that the rate of people with allergies and asthma has gone up dramatically over the last half century, and we don't have changes in genes that quickly, right? And so the changes that have driven this increase in allergy and asthma is largely related to environment. And what is true for allergy and is also true for a number of autoimmune diseases is that if you live in countries that, for lack of a better term, I'll call third world countries that have more exposure to bacterial products and viruses, you have a much lower incidence of allergy and asthma and autoimmune disease. And so we think that this is largely a byproduct of Western civilization, and that, again, coming back to how do you train your immune system, we are now training our immune systems very differently than we did 50 years ago. And that changes the kind of immune response that the immune system is trained to do. And again, if you combine that with perhaps genetic susceptibility and exposure, so if you can imagine somebody who grew up in a place where there is no ragweed probably doesn't have ragweed allergies and can become an adult and move to a place where there is ragweed and over time become sensitized and get it. So again, the environment plays a role in terms of what you're exposed to, but it's also playing a role in how your immune system is trained. What I would say for this particular study is that it showed for the first time that there is a precursor cell that gives rise to this pathogenic T cell that causes many of the symptoms of both allergic disease and allergic asthma. And now that we know that there is a precursor and that precursor can live for a very long time, we can think about ways to either stop the development of that precursor, or if that precursor does develop, to prevent it from living for a very long time, so shorten its lifespan. And until Bea's work came out, we didn't know that we could do that. And so experimentally, we're able to do that. And so now we can start thinking about, if we can do that experimentally, can we think about how one could develop a drug to try and target that cell? And we haven't thought about targeting that cell before.